She didn't think Draven noticed her, not in the way that mattered. In 3 years of keeping his books, cleaning the money, burying the losses, turning the Syndicate's dirty revenue into quarterly statements, so immaculate they could bring a CRA auditor to tears, Zara had made her peace with being a function, not a person. The human calculator, tucked into the back office on the 14th floor, the one who fixed the numbers while the men with guns fixed everything else. She had been wrong about a lot of things in her 31 years. Wrong about her father staying. Wrong about the accounting firm that recruited her out of SFU and terminated her the week she made partner track, citing restructuring. Wrong about the man who told her she was too complicated to love but too useful to let go. She had a talent for trusting the wrong architecture. But Draven was the first mistake that kept her awake at night. It was a Thursday in late October when everything started unraveling, though Zara wouldn't understand that until much later. She was at her desk at 5:45, running a discrepancy check on the Port of Vancouver transfers, when she heard the familiar sound of his office door opening. Not the knock of someone asking permission, but the deliberate click of someone who owned the air in the room. The Nakamura shipment, Draven said. No preamble. He stood in the doorway of her small office with his jacket undone and his sleeves rolled to the forearms, exposing the pale lines of old scars along his left wrist. He was 41 years old and looked like a man who had stopped apologizing for existing somewhere around his 35th birthday. The bond documentation. I need the revised figures before the morning call. Top drawer of your desk, Zara said without looking up. Blue folder. Numbers are already marked. Silence. She heard him shift his weight in the doorway, which was unusual. Draven didn't shift. Draven stood like something carved. The preliminary, or the clean copy? Both. I ran them this afternoon. She finally looked up. His dark eyes were fixed on the corner of her desk, the one where she kept her phone face down during work hours. The clean copy is on top. He nodded once, started to turn back. I'm leaving at 6 today, Zara said. The turning stopped. She watched him process it, not with any visible expression, because Draven's face had long since been trained into blankness, but with a slight stillness, the kind that preceded a tectonic shift. She had learned to read the pauses. They were the only honest thing about him. The Nakamura call is at 7:30 tomorrow morning, he said. I may need to revise the notes are in the folder. There's a summary on the last page in plain language. You won't need me. She picked up her jacket from the back of her chair. She felt his gaze follow the movement like a searchlight tracking a target. I have an appointment. The word sat in the air between them. What kind of appointment? It wasn't a question. His voice had dropped a register, and Zara recognized that too, the frequency he used when he wanted something and was choosing not to ask directly. Personal, she said. She watched something move behind his eyes, something she had no name for, or perhaps a name she wasn't ready to use. She picked up her bag, offered him the flat, professional smile she had spent 3 years perfecting, and walked past him into the hallway. She didn't look back. She had learned early that looking back at things like Draven was the fastest way to turn into salt. Joel Whittaker was a civil engineer who coached recreational hockey on Saturday mornings and had the kind of open, uncomplicated face that Zara associated with men who genuinely believed in other people. He was 33. He had a dry, unhurried sense of humor. He had sent her a text at 3 in the afternoon asking if she preferred red or white, because he'd made a reservation at a wine bar in Yaletown, but wanted her to actually enjoy it. No one in Zara's recent history had thought to ask. She found the wine bar without difficulty, a warm, low-lit room on Hamilton Street, the kind of place that smelled like cedar and good oak, and the particular kind of quiet money that didn't need to announce itself. Joel was already there, standing when she arrived, with the slight, nervous energy of a man who was trying very hard not to look nervous. It was, Zara thought, deeply endearing. They talked for 2 hours, about nothing consequential, his team's losing streak, a documentary she'd been meaning to watch, the ongoing civic embarrassment of the city's construction timelines. She ate something. She drank a glass of Burgundy that was better than anything she had consumed in years. She laughed at something he said, a real laugh, the kind that surprised her on the way out. She almost didn't notice the shadow. It was peripheral, a figure standing on the sidewalk beyond the wine bar's wide front windows, barely visible past the soft condensation on the glass. Large, still, the kind of still that was practiced, not accidental. She registered it for half a second before Joel said something that pulled her attention back, and by the time she glanced toward the window again, the sidewalk was empty. Rain, she told herself. Reflections, her imagination which had always been inconveniently active. She let Joel walk her to the cab line. He touched her elbow briefly when they said good night, the lightest, most carefully considered touch, and said he'd like to do it again sometime, if she was interested. She said she was. She spent the cab ride home trying to remember the last time she had meant that about anything. Joel texted her on Friday evening, something casual and easy, checking that she'd gotten home all right. She texted back. On Saturday he sent a link to a documentary about Scandinavian urban planning with a note that just said, "Thought you'd like this," and she found herself smiling at her phone like a fool. On Sunday, nothing. On Monday, a brief message. "Something's come up at work. Might be a bit chaotic this week. I'll be in touch." She replied with something low stakes and went back to the Syndicate's port receivables, which were a mess and required her full attention. She was good at redirecting herself. She had spent years becoming good at it. Tuesday passed. Wednesday. By Thursday, the silence had acquired a texture, dense and deliberate, the kind that didn't come from a busy week. It came from a person who had somewhere specific to be and was no longer somewhere near her. Zara filed it away. She was pragmatic by nature, which meant she knew how to pick through the evidence and reach a conclusion without making it personal. People got cold feet. It happened. She was not the kind of woman who chased. She buried herself in the quarterly transition, working 12-hour days that she told herself were about the numbers and not about keeping her mind occupied. On Friday afternoon, she found the discrepancy. It was small. Buried on page 19 of an internal services invoice from one of Draven's legitimate holding companies, a legal retainer fee for a third-party consulting review, authorized 11 days ago, targeting a shell account that routed through a civic infrastructure firm. Zara stared at the line item for a long time. She knew Draven's shell accounts the way she knew her own handwriting. She had built half of them herself. This particular one routed through a numbered company that she had specifically structured for lease interventions. The mechanism used when Draven needed to pressure a property asset without leaving fingerprints. The civil infrastructure firm named on the invoice was Joel's employer. Her fingers were very still on the keyboard. She didn't panic. She had never been someone who panicked. Panic was a luxury that required the belief that someone else would come and fix things, and Zara had understood since she was 16 years old that no one was coming. She simply sat for a moment with the information, turning it over in her mind, the way she turned over a balance sheet that wasn't adding up. Then she started to look. She was very good at looking. It was, professionally speaking, the only thing she was actually brilliant at. Finding the line that didn't belong, following the thread that someone had tried to tuck away. She dug through 3 layers of shell accounts, 2 offshore holding structures, and a whack of internal transaction logs before she had the full shape of it. The lease on Joel's apartment building had been acquired by a numbered company that was, at 2 removes, controlled by a Draven subsidiary. A covenant review, standard language, barely noticeable, had triggered a relocation clause the previous week. A professional licensing complaint had been filed against his engineering firm with the provincial body. Anonymous, highly specific. The timing was neat. There were no dramatic fingerprints. There were never dramatic fingerprints with Draven. Just quiet pressure applied at the precisely correct structural point, like a load-bearing wall that had been carefully undermined until the whole room listed. 11 days ago. The morning after her date. Zara closed the files. She leaned back in her chair and listened to the building settle around her, the low mechanical hum of the HVAC, the distant sound of rain against the windows, the muffled voices of the men down the hall. Outside, the October sky over Burrard Inlet was the color of old pewter. She had been wrong about being invisible. That was the part she couldn't quite get past. She thought about the way he'd stood in her doorway when she said she was leaving. The particular quality of the silence. She thought about the shape on the sidewalk outside the wine bar, the one she had talked herself out of. She thought about 3 years of working inside his orbit, learning his rhythms, understanding the precise architecture of how he thought, and the fact that he had apparently been doing the same. The anger arrived slowly, not the hot, reactive kind, the cold kind, which was much worse, the kind that sharpened everything until the world looked like something that could cut. She was not a possession. She was not an asset in a ledger. She was not something to be managed. She stood up, picked up the page she'd printed, the one with the invoice line item, the name of the firm, the dates, and walked toward his office. She didn't knock. Draven was on the phone, standing by the window in his preferred position, watching the rain against the glass. He held a glass of single malt in his free hand and wore the expression of a man who was being mildly reasonable towards someone who wasn't earning it. He glanced over his shoulder when she entered, raised one finger, "Give me a moment," and turned back to the window. "Tell them the terms don't change because they're nervous," he said into the phone. "They either close on the original conditions or they don't close. I genuinely don't care which." He waited a beat. "Good, do it." He hung up and turned to face her. His eyes moved to the paper in her hand and something, not quite a flinch, but the ghost of one, moved across his face before the blankness settled back into place. "Sit down, Zara." "I'd rather not." She walked to the center of the room and set the page down on his desk. She smoothed it flat with her fingertips, very precisely, and then stepped back. "I found a line item." He said nothing. He crossed to the desk slowly, the way he did everything, with the measured, deliberate weight of a man who had long ago decided that urgency was a form of weakness. He looked at the paper. "It's an internal review." "Don't," she said it quietly, but it stopped him. He looked up. She held his gaze and felt the strange vertigo of it. This man who made other men nervous from across a room, looking at her with something she had spent 3 years deciding she was imagining. "I built those accounts. I know what they're for. I know exactly what a covenant review looks like when it's meant to move someone out of a building." The silence stretched. "He wasn't right for you," Draven said. She had expected denial. She had prepared for it. She had not prepared for the flatness of the admission, the way he said it the same way he would cite a calculation, a simple fact, a line in a ledger. "You don't know anything about him," Zara said. "I know he was." "You don't know anything about him." Her voice had acquired an edge she didn't normally let surface at work. "You ran a background file on a man I went to dinner with once. You pulled his lease and threatened his license because he was sitting across a table from me. You didn't ask me. You didn't say a word to me. You just moved the pieces." She stopped. The anger was pressing at the back of her throat, tight and controlled, but barely. "You don't own me, Draven. I am not one of your port contracts." Something shifted in his face. Not anger. She had seen his anger, and it was an entirely different creature. This was something rawer. Something he was controlling the same way she was controlling hers. "I know that," he said. "Do you?" She picked up the page from his desk, folded it once, and tucked it into her jacket pocket. "You want to know what I'm worth? 3 years of keeping your operation from collapsing under its own weight. 3 years of finding the problems before they became crises, and fixing them before you even knew they existed. I did all of that because I respected the work." She picked up her bag from the visitor's chair. "I can't respect what I found today." She walked to the door. She heard him move, a single step, and then stop himself. She heard the precise moment he decided not to follow. "Zara." She paused with her hand on the door frame. If you walk out, the severance isn't negotiable. You lose the protection of this organization. His voice was flat. It was the only way he knew to threaten someone, in declarative sentences, like terms in a contract. She looked back over her shoulder. She held his gaze for one long, deliberate moment. "I never asked for your protection," she said. "I was always the one doing the protecting." She left. 2 weeks, 4 days. That was how long Zara lasted in the logistics consultancy she picked up downtown. A contract role with a mid-sized supply chain firm in the Bentel Center, where she sat under fluorescent lights and built inventory models for a client whose most dramatic crisis was a delayed shipment of commercial fixtures from Guangzhou. The work was clean, the people were pleasant. No one's lease was being strategically dismantled. No one sent her ambiguous messages at midnight that weren't quite business and weren't quite personal. She ate lunch at regular hours. She went home at 5:30. She slept without a phone on her nightstand. She was, by any rational metric, safe. She was also quietly going out of her mind. She had spent 3 years working at the edge of something that mattered. Not morally. She was clear-eyed about what Draven's operation was, and had long since made her uncomfortable peace with it, but in terms of genuine consequence. The stakes had been real. The numbers had meant something. Every discrepancy she'd found, every structural flaw she'd patched, had been the difference between a controlled outcome and a disaster. She had been necessary in the precise way that very few people ever got to be necessary. Sitting in a glass cubicle on the 22nd floor, building a pivot table about cabinet hardware, she felt the specific suffocation of a person who had learned to breathe pressurized air and was now expected to manage on something thinner. She missed the work. She would not let herself say what else she missed. It was a Tuesday night, past 11, when someone knocked on her apartment door. Not hard, not urgent, just a steady, tired rhythm, like a person who wasn't sure they had the right to knock but was doing it anyway. Zara looked through the peephole. The man on the other side of the door was large and grey-faced, and wearing a jacket with a dark stain spreading at the left shoulder. His name was Walt. Draven's driver, the man who had once, without being asked, sat outside a hospital parking lot for 6 hours while Zara waited for her mother to come out of surgery, and had never mentioned it to anyone. She opened the door. "Walt," she clocked the shoulder immediately. "You're bleeding. Get inside." "It's a graze." He stepped in, and she could see now that he was managing his breathing carefully, the short, controlled inhalations of someone working around pain. "I didn't want to come here, Miss Zara." "He told me not to," he specifically said. "Sit on the dining chair, not the sofa." She was already moving to the kitchen cabinet where she kept the first aid kit. "Where is he?" "Industrial property in South Surrey, one of the cold storage facilities." Walt sat heavily. "There was a move tonight. Larkin's crew, they'd been waiting for the right moment and they found it. 3 of ours went down. Draven took a round through the left side, up through the ribs. He's losing blood." He looked at his hands. He sent away the doctor. Man held a gun to the doctor's head and told him to leave. He's just sitting in there, in the dark. Won't let anyone near him. Zara set the first aid kit on the table. She opened it without looking at Walt. "He's been like that since you walked out," Walt continued. "Not sleeping right, missing signals he would never normally miss. Larkin's crew shouldn't have gotten within 3 blocks of him. He was distracted." A pause. "I think he stopped caring enough to be careful, Miss Zara, and now he's bleeding out in a folding chair and won't let anybody help him." She unwrapped a compression bandage. She focused on Walt's shoulder with the concentrated attention she gave to any problem she was trying not to feel. "He'll survive," she said. "Draven's too organized to die from something he didn't plan." "Maybe." Walt looked up at her. "But I've driven that man for 9 years and I've never seen him like this. You're the only one he listens to. You always have been, even when neither of you would admit it." Zara taped the bandage and stepped back. She looked at the wall of her apartment, the clean, quiet, properly lit wall of her safe and rational life. with its sensible thermostat and its complete absence of anything that could get her killed. She thought about Joel, about the debt she was morally owed there, the debt Draven had created on her behalf without her consent. That wasn't forgiven. It couldn't be pretended away. She had built her entire working life on the principle that the books had to balance, and this one didn't. But she thought about something else, too. The particular quality of the way Draven had said, "I know," that when she told him she wasn't his to own, the step he had taken toward the door and then stopped himself. The precision of that restraint, from a man for whom restraint was the most expensive thing he ever chose. She went to her closet. She pulled out her heavy wool coat, the charcoal one, the functional one, not the one she'd worn to the wine bar. She came back to the living room. "Can you drive?" she asked. Walt stood slowly. "Yeah, I can drive." "Then take me to South Surrey." The cold storage facility smelled of concrete and damp and the faint copper of old industrial machinery. Zara walked through it behind Walt, her heels finding the uneven floor carefully, the overhead fluorescents flickering at the far end of the building. He was in the back office, a square, windowless room with a metal desk and a camp chair, and a single lamp turned toward the corner so the light went mostly sideways. Draven was in the camp chair. He was stripped to his undershirt, which was soaked through on the left side. His head was tipped back. His eyes were closed. A handgun rested loosely in his right hand, not aimed at anything, just held the way a person holds something they can't put down. He looked like a man who had been fighting something for a very long time and had just decided to stop fighting. She stepped fully into the room. His eyes opened. The gun came up immediately, fast, trained, the motion of a man whose body had been conditioned to react before his mind caught up. She stood still and let him see her. It took 3 seconds, the gun lowered. It didn't drop exactly, but the angle changed, and that was enough. He stared at her. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was different, abraded, stripped of its usual construction, just the base of it. "Walt told me you." "Walt didn't tell me anything I didn't already choose to walk through." She set her bag on the metal desk and opened it. She had grabbed the first aid kit from her own apartment. The proper one, the kind she'd maintained since working for him, had first made clear that preparedness was a survival strategy. "Put the gun down, Draven. I need both your hands and your cooperation." He set the gun on the desk. He watched her move toward him with an expression she had never seen on his face before, unguarded, stripped of the calculus she was accustomed to, something quiet underneath that she wasn't ready to name. She knelt on the concrete floor and assessed the wound. It was bad, not unsurvivable. His body had clearly decided to be stubborn about it, but it was weeping steadily and would be worse if he kept refusing to let anyone touch it. "This is going to hurt," she said, cracking an antiseptic seal. "I'm aware of how this works," he said. "I wasn't warning you. I was informing you so you don't grab my wrist when it does." She pressed the gauze to the wound and felt him go rigid, every muscle locking at once. His hand found the arm of the camp chair and gripped it. He didn't touch her. She worked in silence for a few minutes. The facility hummed around them. "Why did you come?" he said eventually. His voice was carefully level. "Because Walt asked me to. Walt was supposed to stay away from you. I told him specifically." "I know what you told him." She set a fresh gauze pad and held pressure. "You also apparently told yourself it was acceptable to dismantle a man's career and his housing because he bought me a glass of wine, so your instructions aren't carrying a lot of moral weight right now." A pause. "I know." 2 words isn't an apology. "No." He looked at the top of her head, and she could feel the weight of it like a hand she couldn't see. "It isn't," he exhaled slowly. "Joel Whitaker. He'll receive a compensatory contract offer from a civic infrastructure firm in Calgary by end of week. The licensing complaint has already been withdrawn. The lease issue can be resolved with a single phone call." He stopped. "I should have done it the day after you walked out. I didn't, because I was waiting to see if he'd simply go away on his own." "That's not better," Zara said. "No, it isn't." Something shifted in his voice, the way a building shifts when you remove the load-bearing assumption. Nothing about this is better, Zara. I didn't handle it well. I handled it the only way I know how to handle things that frighten me, which is to remove the problem and tell myself the impulse behind it was rational. A pause. It wasn't rational. She taped the bandage. She peeled off the latex gloves and dropped them on the floor, and she stayed where she was, kneeling on concrete, close enough to feel the heat coming off him, far enough to still have a decision to make. He was a good person, she said. Joel. He asked what I wanted to drink before he made the reservation. I know, a flat, honest misery in those 2 words. That was the problem. She looked up. Draven was looking down at her, and there was nothing on his face now that she couldn't read. No calculation, no management, no careful presentation of a man who had everything arranged to his satisfaction. Just the bare fact of him, 41 years old, and tired in a way that had nothing to do with a bullet wound, and the particular way he was looking at her that made the last 3 years suddenly arrange themselves into a pattern she had refused to see. She had been wrong about being invisible. I am not a problem to be removed, she said quietly. No, his voice dropped. You're the only thing that hasn't felt like one in a very long time. She studied his face for a long moment, the scar along his jaw that had come from something he never talked about, the lines around his eyes that were newer than when she'd started, the complete stillness of a man holding himself absolutely motionless because he had decided that whatever happened next was not going to be decided by his hands. She stood up. She was close enough that she had to tilt her chin up slightly. You're going to let the doctor in, she said, tonight. And you're going to make the call about Joel tomorrow morning before I get to the office. Before you get to the office, he repeated carefully. I'll be in at 9. The Nakamura follow-up is overdue, and you've apparently let the receivables turn into a complete disaster. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, not enough to be called that, but the structural suggestion of one, the first genuinely unguarded expression she had ever seen from him. You're coming back, he said. I'm coming back to work, Zara said. She held his gaze. Everything else is a different conversation, and we're going to have it when you're not bleeding in a folding chair on a cold storage floor. She stepped back, giving them both the decency of space. Do we understand each other, Draven? Yes, he said. She picked up her bag. She turned toward the door. Zara, his voice caught her at the threshold. She looked back. He was watching her with that stripped, unguarded expression, and she thought he might say something that would change the texture of everything, something that would make it harder to keep the boundary she'd drawn. Instead, he said, The Nakamura receivables are in the blue folder on your desk. I moved them to the top drawer so you could find them quickly. She stared at him. You knew I was coming back, she said. No, something very quiet in his voice. I was hoping. She left him there in the half-light. She walked back through the facility, past Walt, who was standing with his arms folded and an expression of profound relief he was trying to disguise as professional neutrality. She pushed through the heavy door into the South Surrey night, into the cold, salt-edged air off the inlet, and she stood there for a moment with the rain just starting. The light, persistent kind that Vancouver did better than anywhere else, the kind that didn't announce itself, just arrived and stayed. She had spent 3 years deciding she was a function, a mechanism, the human calculator kept around for her usefulness and nothing else. She thought about the blue folder on her desk, moved so she could find it quickly. She had been wrong about a lot of things. This one she thought she could live with. Power doesn't always look like a throne. Sometimes it looks like a woman standing in the rain outside a South Surrey cold storage facility who has just negotiated terms with the most dangerous man in Vancouver without raising her voice. Zara didn't tame Draven. She did something harder than that. She made him choose, and the choice he made said everything about what she had always been worth, even on the days she had forgotten it herself. Was it complicated? Absolutely. Was it safe? Not even slightly. But some things are bigger than safety, and some people only make sense in the presence of someone who can hold the whole impossible weight of them without looking away. Drop a comment and tell us, did Zara make the right call going back? And what do you think Draven said first, on the morning she walked back into that office at 9 o'clock sharp? If this story found you tonight, hit subscribe. We're just getting started.